In 1999, on a bare stretch of ground in Cane Valley, Arizona, workers planted 3,800 desert shrubs on drip irrigation. By 2004, 94% were still alive. It was not landscaping. It was meant to absorb what was buried underneath. Monument Valley is supposed to be untouched land. From 1943 to 1968, the largest uranium mine in Arizona operated at its edge, and the cleanup is still not finished. Nearly 30 million tons of uranium ore came out of Navajo land between 1944 and 1986. The EPA is still working through more than 500 abandoned mines on the reservation. 10 places made this list. We start at number 10. 90 fenced acres, no buildings standing, and rows of irrigated shrubs planted over a groundwater plume in a place that gets 6 inches of rain a year. Stay until number 3. One of the most famous dinosaurs in movie history came out of the ground a few miles from here. The man who found it was not a paleontologist. Almost everything you remember about it was invented. If you're drawn to places most people drive past without stopping, subscribe. We cover one every week. Today we are counting down 10 places in Monument Valley's shadow most of the country has never heard of. Number 10. The Mill at the Foot of the Mittens. You come in from the south, off a dirt road, and the first thing you notice is the fence. 90 acres of open ground, chain link on all sides, and inside it, nothing. No mill, no headframe, no rusted equipment leaning in the wind. Just flat sand, a scatter of monitoring wells sticking up like survey stakes, and, if you look closely, straight rows of green shrubs where nothing should grow at all. Wild burros sometimes wander through. Nobody stops them. There is nobody here to stop. This is Cane Valley, on the Arizona side of Monument Valley, in the Olhado chapter of the Navajo Nation. Around 216 people live nearby, in 71 homes, all of them Navajo. Most visitors to Monument Valley never come this way. There is no scenic overlook. There is only a fence. In August of 1942, a Navajo man named Luke Yazzie showed the Vanadium Corporation of America an outcrop of ore in this valley. Vanadium was a war metal, and this was wartime. 6 years later, uranium became the thing that mattered, and the hole Yazzie had pointed to became the largest uranium mine in Arizona, more than 770,000 tons of ore, over its life. In 1955, the company stopped hauling the rock away and built a mill right here instead. By 1964, it was leaching the ore with sulfuric acid, 900 tons a day. In 1968, the contracts ran out. The company pulled the buildings down and left. What it did not take with it was the ammonium sitting in the soil beneath the tailings pile. That kept breaking down into nitrate, and the nitrate kept moving into the groundwater, quietly, for decades. The tailings themselves, 1.3 million dry tons of contaminated material, were finally hauled out in 1994, trucked 15 miles north to a disposal site in Utah. The water underneath them was not. Here's the wild part. Nobody could figure out how to pump the plume out, so in 1999, the government tried something else. It planted a grid of nearly 4,000 four-wing saltbush shrubs on drip irrigation directly over the contamination. An irrigated farm in a place that gets about 6 inches of rain a year. It worked, for a while. 94% of the shrubs were still alive in 2004. Then, the ground dried out, and the nitrogen stopped dropping. As of this year, the Department of Energy still has not chosen a permanent way to deal with what's left. In April, it filed paperwork to replace the fence. That's the update. Not a cleanup plan. A new fence. Miners here worked without ventilation, and many of them developed lung cancer years later. Congress eventually paid affected miners and their families $100,000 each, under a law passed in 1990. Community members living nearby have told the government, formally, that they believe the site is still making people sick, that dust blows off it, that their livestock drink from water it has touched. The buildings are gone. The mine is gone. What's left is grass planted on purpose, a fence that keeps getting rebuilt, and paperwork that keeps getting filed, for a hole in the ground that closed before most of the people living near it were born. Number 9. the prison with no charges. For 7 months in 1943, the United States operated a prison camp on the Navajo Nation. The prisoners were American citizens. There were no charges, there were no hearings, and there were roughly 150 military police guarding fewer than 60 men. It was called the Loop Isolation Center, and it opened on April 27, 1943, in a set of red sandstone buildings about 3.5 miles east of the Loop Chapter House in Coconino County. The buildings had been a Navajo boarding school. 500 children had lived there once. It closed the year before because it sat in a floodplain. The men sent to Loop came from the Japanese-American incarceration camps elsewhere in the country. Camp directors could send anyone they judged a troublemaker with no formal charge required. One War Relocation Authority administrator wrote, at the time, that the project director at Loop did not know why some of the men had been sent there. Neither did the men. Requests for an explanation went unanswered. The Navajo Tribal Council had approved use of the school to help in the war effort against alien enemies. Nobody had told them what that would actually mean. It took less than 8 months for the government's own lawyer to turn on the place. The WRA's solicitor called Loop an un-American institution, using Gestapo methods. A review committee recommended shutting it down. On December 2, 1943, it closed, and the surviving prisoners were sent on to the Tule Lake Segregation Center. Afterward, the military bulldozed the buildings. These were the same buildings where Navajo children had once been punished for speaking their own language, soap in their mouths, made to kneel on broomsticks, and where girls were permitted to speak Diné Bizaad only during weaving lessons. The government took a place already built to erase one people's language and used it to hold another people's citizens without trial. There is no historical marker here, not one. A visitor in 2017 had to navigate by old maps just to find the site, because nothing points to it. What remains is foundations under drifted silt, a rusted tangle of barbed wire, the concrete footing of a guard tower, and one red sandstone house, the old superintendent's residence, where someone from Loop still lives today. A team of archaeologists, led by a Diné researcher, has spent 5 years quietly mapping what's left and recording what people remember. It was never turned into a park. The only marker anyone ever put up is the one nobody built. Number 8. 273 miles of buried water. For 35 years, one of the driest inhabited places in North America pumped more than 1 billion gallons of drinking water a year out of the ground, mixed it with crushed coal, and sent it 273 miles through a buried pipe to a power plant in Nevada. The place is Black Mesa, sacred to both the Navajo and the Hopi, in Navajo County. Peabody Western Coal Company ran 2 strip mines here, one from 1970 to 2005, the other from 1973 to 2019, covering nearly 65,000 acres. To move the coal off a roadless mesa, the company ground it down to about 1 millimeter, mixed it half and half with water, and pumped the slurry through an 18-inch pipe, buried at least 3 feet down, all the way to the Mojave Generating Station in Laughlin. The water came from the N Aquifer, the same aquifer that supplies drinking water to the people living on top of the mesa. Roughly 1.3 billion gallons a year, for 35 years. Wells in the confined part of the aquifer dropped by as much as 130 feet. The Hopi tribe's own lawyer for these negotiations, a man named John Boyden, was secretly on Peabody's payroll at the same time he was representing the Hopi. His work for the coal company only came to light after his death, when a researcher went through his files. The pipeline shut down in 2005 when the power plant on the other end lost a Clean Air Act lawsuit. The mines kept running until 2019. And since the pumping stopped, something strange has happened. 3 of the deep monitoring wells have actually recovered, one of them by more than 30 feet. But the springs at the surface, the ones people and animals actually drink from, are still declining. The water is coming back underground. It is not coming back up. What's left today is reclamation in progress. Pits filled and reseeded with native grass, telephone poles left standing on purpose as perches for hawks, dirt roads still marked with old-school bus stop signs nobody's taken down, Full release of the land back to the tribes isn't expected until the late 2030s. Peabody still has to give permission before anyone can graze livestock on ground that used to be theirs. Number 7. The Thousand-Year Hill. 5 miles east of Tuba City, there is a hill that did not exist before 1990. It covers 50 acres, stands 44 feet tall, and is built entirely out of rock. It was designed to last 1,000 years. That is longer than the United States has existed. Underneath it is what's left of a uranium and vanadium mill that the Rare Metals Corporation of America ran here from 1956 to 1966, processing about 800,000 tons of ore. When it closed, it left behind tailings, 33.5 acres of evaporation ponds, and wind-blown contamination spread across 250 acres downwind. The federal cleanup, decades later, didn't haul the waste away. It piled everything on site and built a rock-armored mound over the top, with a clay liner underneath, meant to hold the radon in. New monitoring wells were still being installed as recently as 2023, and the site has picked up a Federal Excellence Award along the way, for a cleanup that, by its own numbers, has not caught up with the contamination it was built to catch. The design has one flaw baked into it from the start. The groundwater underneath was already contaminated, with uranium, molybdenum, nitrate, selenium, and it has been moving, slowly, toward a spring the Hopi village of Lower Mokenkopi uses for drinking water. A pump-and-treat plant went in 2002, to catch it. It broke down repeatedly and was switched off as unreliable in 2014. Between 2002 and 2023, 21 years of pumping removed 441 million gallons of contaminated water. That is 28% of the original goal. The government's own numbers suggest what's still down there could outweigh what's been removed by more than 200 times. One analysis concluded the cleanup could take centuries. 104 monitoring wells get checked twice a year, on schedule, indefinitely. That is what's there today. A permanent hill, built to outlast the country that built it. A switched-off treatment plant beside it, and a slow-moving plume the pumps never caught up to. Number 6. The Line on the Rock. Third Mesa, on the Hopi Reservation, holds what might be the oldest continuously inhabited settlement in the United States. People have lived at Oribe since before 1100 AD, some sources say. On September 8, 1906, the village tore itself apart. Not with weapons, with a shoving match. By then, Oribe had split into 2 factions over how to deal with the United States government, specifically, whether to send Hopi children to federal boarding schools. One side, led by a man named Tawaquaptiwa, was willing to accommodate. The other, led by Ukioma, was not. Rather than fight, the 2 leaders agreed to settle it physically. A line was scratched into the rock. Both sides put their shoulders into it and pushed. Whoever crossed the line first would have to leave. Ukioma's side lost. They walked out that day and founded a new village, Hotevia, about 4 miles away. The federal response was not gentle. Troops forcibly relocated the new village's residents, put the men on chain gangs for 18 months, and imprisoned 17 leaders at Fort Huachuca. Tawaquaptiwa, the man who won, was stripped of his chieftainship and sent away to boarding school in California anyway, to avoid being separated from the Hopi children who were sent there too. He came home 3 years later. The line is still there, carved into the stone, with a bear paw for one clan and a skull for the other. The inscription reads, roughly, that when you pass this line, it will be done. Old Oribe is still inhabited today, home to fewer than 100 people. Residents do not allow photography in the village, and outsiders need a certified guide to go anywhere off the highway. A place old enough to remember before the United States existed is still enforcing rules the United States never gets a vote on. If you're finding this one interesting, drop a thumbs up and tell me in the comments which of these places has surprised you the most so far. We read every one. Number 3 is still coming. That's the one I mentioned at the start, and it's worth the wait. Number 5, sealed since 1968. No member of the public has legally set foot inside Inscription House since 1968. It sits inside Navajo National Monument, which is not a large park by any measure. 3 separate parcels of land, totaling 360 acres, protecting 3 13th-century cliff dwellings tucked into the sandstone canyons west of Kayenta. Inscription House is the one nobody can see. The National Park Service closed it because it was too fragile to survive being visited. Built partly of mud and grass adobe, without the deep rock overhang that shelters the other 2 dwellings from weather. It has been sealed for over half a century. It got its name from a carving. In the summer of 1909, during an archaeological expedition, 3 children, one of them 11 years old, scraped mud off a wall and found letters underneath. The party read it as a date, 1661. If true, it meant Spanish explorers had been standing in that canyon 2 centuries before any American ever would. Nobody has ever confirmed the reading. The man who first transcribed it admitted several of the letters were illegible, and later wondered if the date might actually be 1861. The Park Service's own 1951 handbook says the wording has been variously reported. No one has ever agreed on what the rock actually says. The other 2 dwellings are barely more accessible. Bedetaken sits inside an alcove 452 feet high and can only be toured with a ranger. Keet Seal allows 20 hikers a day and only after a 17-mile round trip on foot. In 2024, the entire monument recorded fewer than 60,000 visits, and more than 95% of those people never left the parking area at headquarters. 3 of the best-preserved cliff dwellings in North America, and almost nobody who drives out here actually sees one. The best-kept ruin in the park is the one that's permanently locked. Number 4. The waterfall they locked. In March of 2023, the people who live along the Little Colorado River closed one of the most photographed waterfalls in Arizona, and then built a barricade across the road themselves to make sure it stayed closed. The waterfall is Grand Falls, known in Navajo as Atahilini, 185 feet of muddy brown water dropping over black lava rock near Layup. It only exists a few weeks a year, when spring snowmelt or a summer monsoon gives the Little Colorado enough water to actually flow. Most of the year, the same channel is a dry, cracked riverbed. When it does run, the water carries 240 miles of collected desert sand and clay, which is why it looks like chocolate instead of water. It exists at all because of a lava flow, roughly 20,000 years old, that poured out of nearby Merriam Crater and dammed the river in a 200-foot deep gorge. The river had nowhere else to go, so it started going over the top. It still does, on the rare weeks the desert lets it. For decades, almost nobody came. Then the falls became a social media location, and the people whose homes, burial grounds, and ceremonial sites sit along that stretch of river started finding ATVs on their land, drones overhead, and trash piling up where they hold ceremonies. So they closed it. When the local chapter government would only acknowledge the closure and not formally back it, residents built the barricade themselves. Boulders, boards, a cable across the dirt road, and they are still the ones manning it. There is no park service out here, no gate attendant, no rangers, just people protecting a sacred place with a cable and a hand-painted sign, because nobody else was going to do it for them. Number 3. The dinosaur Hollywood made up. Off a dirt road near Moenave, west of Tuba City, there's a patch of bare sandstone next to a Navajo jewelry stand, where a guide will show you a dinosaur footprint, a dinosaur egg, and something described, cheerfully, as a fossilized dinosaur dropping. Only one of those 3 things is real. The footprint is genuine, early Jurassic, around 200 million years old, verified by paleontologists at Northern Arizona University. The egg is an iron concretion. The dropping is also an iron concretion. The skeleton nearby is just weathered sandstone that happens to look like bone. The guides work for tips, usually $5 to $20, and even the travel writers who cover the place admit, in print, that what you hear on the walk isn't always accurate. This is where I'm paying off what I mentioned at the start. A few miles from this exact spot, in 1940, a Navajo man named Jesse Williams found bones eroding out of the ground and led a Berkeley expedition to them. The animal was excavated in 1942, misidentified for over a decade, and finally given its own name in 1970, Dilophosaurus, two-crested lizard. It was about 20 feet long and weighed roughly 3/4 of a ton. Here's the detail that stops people cold. That is the dinosaur from Jurassic Park, the small one that fans out a neck frill and spits venom at a man in a Jeep. Neither of those things has any basis in the actual fossil record. No frill. No venom. The only thing the movie got right was the crest on its head, and even that came out smaller on screen than the real animal actually was. A Navajo man found one of the most famous dinosaurs in film history on his own land, in a spot most tourists drive right past on the way to somewhere else. Hollywood took it, shrank it, and gave it powers it never had. The real one was already strange enough. Number 2. The gallery nobody built. Cow Springs Trading Post opened in 1882, the kind of place where you brought in wool and rugs and left with flour and credit. The Babbitt brothers of Flagstaff bought it in 1895 and ran it for decades, until trading posts like it stopped making sense, and it closed sometime in the 1970s. What happened after, nobody planned. Every wooden beam was pulled out and burned for firewood. Every piece of metal was stripped for scrap. What was left was a shell of bare concrete blocks, and people started painting on it. 50 years later, it is layered floor to ceiling in tags, gang signs, and full political murals about reservation life, including large photographic pieces from an artist who goes by Jetsonorama. Nobody curates any of it. Nobody has to. 9 miles down the same highway, near Tonalea, 2 sandstone pillars stand right at the roadside, weathered into blunt, toe-like shapes by wind and water working the rock for millions of years. Locals call them the elephant's feet. Vendors sell jewelry in the pullout beside them. One is a ruin that turned itself into an art gallery. The other is a rock that turned itself into an elephant. Neither one had a grand opening, and neither one has ever needed a plaque to explain what it is. Number 1. Purple Hearts and Onion Rings. There is a Burger King in Kayenta, Arizona, where you can order a Whopper and then walk past a display case with a purple heart set into a silver and turquoise bracelet, sitting a few feet from the soda fountain. It is free. It is open from 6 in the morning, and by the restaurant's own account, there is more Navajo Code Talker memorabilia inside this particular Burger King than there is at the Pentagon. It exists because of one man's father and one accident. Richard Mike opened the restaurant in 1986, the first fast food in town. His father, King Mike, had served as a Navajo code talker during the Second World War. Richard did not know that. The code was classified until the Vietnam era, and the men who built it mostly never talked about what they'd done. Richard found out only when he came across an old postcard while moving boxes, years after the war had ended. Rather than put his father's collection in a closet, he put it on the walls of his dining room. Uniforms, photographs, documents, Japanese weapons and flags brought back from the Pacific. Other veterans, hearing about it, started donating their own souvenirs. Only about a third of it fits on display at any one time. Outside, a 75-foot sign points travelers in. Kayenta itself is a little unusual too. It's the only place on the entire Navajo Nation with its own municipal-style township government. And in 1997, it became the first place on the reservation to pass its own local sales tax. Every single visitor headed north into Monument Valley drives straight through the middle of it, which is the real punchline. Millions of people have driven past this Burger King on their way to photograph the most famous landscape in the American Southwest, and almost none of them stop to look at the small, free, unassuming war museum sitting inside it, built by a son who didn't find out what his father did until he found a postcard in a box and decided the least he could do was put it on the wall where people could see it. 10 places, all within the shadow of Monument Valley, and this list started at the deep end before it ever eased into anything lighter. My favorite is the Burger King in Kayenta, a father who never talked about the war, a son who found out by accident, and a war museum built next to a soda fountain almost by mistake. Which one surprised you? Tell me in the comments. If forgotten corners like these are what you're after, subscribe. There's a lot more of the map left to cover.